Alright, hello, welcome to round 4 of the break round of YTN HUFS School-Based Championship. My name is London, I will be sharing this round. On the moment we have team Flores, and all officially we have team Hassan. Under the motion, this House believes that scientific community should seek to reverse the destruction of the environment rather than the potential unsustainable form of development. Without any further ado, let's invite the Prime Minister.
May I start? So hello, Mr. Speaker and fellow debaters. So today in our society, in the government team, I'd like to first introduce the status quo of today's motion. So the status quo of today's motion is about how the environment is so severe and how it is irreversible, so that the government's purpose and the government role should be centered on how this environment is so urgent and the problem is so urgent that we have to solve this in a more efficient and a more quicker and a more guaranteed way. So we believe that we are in the current status quo. We are in a very tipping point in an iceberg where we're having 1 minute or like several seconds left before we're actually having a destruction on the environment totally. And we believe that there are several examples actually that are expressing this problem, such as first about how these people are having the sea levels that are skyrocketing in Iceland, and we believe that in these cases, these people are having a severe stress in their lives. And also we believe that second, there is climate change, meaning that there are severe differences in the ordinary weather, such as the summer being extremely hot and the winter being extremely cold. So now I want to move on to our team's stance. So the government team's stance in today's debate is about how we're going to prioritize a more systematic and a more better and effective solution towards the root cause and the root problem of this debate. So now to move on to our team's first argument. So our team's first argument is about the line where we prioritize something over the other. So we're going to give 3 main standards. The first standard is about whether this has a higher value, second about the long-term extensions, and third about why this is winning the possibility game and why this is more guaranteed. So now to right now move on to the second analysis about why this applies to this motion. So the first standard about how there is more higher value, we believe that comparing the environment, which is so urgent, and we believe that because the environment is the main platform for these people to live and for the economy to develop in the first place, we believe that we should have more prioritization for the environment than the economy. And also we believe that in the cases of economy, however, there is already sustainable standards for South Korea and the other countries to develop because the environment is because the economy is so developed already. And secondly, we believe that in the second standard about how this environment is so vulnerable and irreversible, we believe that this environment leads to a lot of tipping points because, as I've already stated in my status quo, we believe that this economy cannot just trickle or crash just because one kind of tipping point, but rather we believe that it is not a very cautious scale that one mistake would make a severe problem. But in the cases of the environment, there is more vulnerable because we are in the tipping point and we are very severe, such as people getting their lives threatened because of the environmental problems. And also in the second standard about the long-term extension, we believe that we are more guaranteeing these benefits because after reversing this environment, as our team is having the policy, we believe that we can utilize our knowledge right now so that we can solve the root cause of these environmental problems in the first place. And also we believe that in the past, already these developing countries such as US and England have been polluting the environment because they did not know about the root cause and because they didn't know about the problem and because they didn't know about the effect. We believe that if we actually know the effect and if we already know the pollution, we believe that we can have a more effective solution to solve this problem. And the third standard about how this is guaranteed and have a more possibility game, we believe that in this standard, we are more guaranteeing because the opposition is just having an attempt, and already in the status quo, it is very proof that the sustainable energy is very hard to develop, but we believe that in our case, we're actually reversing the environment in the first place so that we'll be more guaranteed to have a better technology and a better future for these citizens. And also we believe that in our second argument, we're going to talk about the effectiveness for the society society. So we believe that there's first about the government responsibility to try to protect these citizens' lives in the first place. So we believe that these citizens' lives are a most important priority that these governments should care about in the current status quo. For example, in the cases of yellow dust, because this yellow dust is severely harming the people's lungs, and because these yellow dust is severely affecting these people's health, their people are very harmed on their health. We believe that in these cases, this is very urgent because this is directly related to the safety of the citizens and the health of the citizens, which is guaranteed by the social contract of the government. Therefore, because our team can actually provide much more prioritization for both the long-term and both the higher value, and also about the citizens' lives, our team strongly proposes this motion. Thank you for listening.
May I start? Mr. Speaker, there are many countries who are still developing in the status quo, and if they prioritize the environment, they could be facing issues such as progress stopping and the economy not developing in the status quo. Progress does not regress, Mr. Speaker. To recontextualize the debate, we want to set the standard for both developed and developing nations for the progress and well-being of the biosphere. The stakeholders in today's debate, as we have identified, are the government, the society, and fossil fuel companies in the status quo. We will prove two things to you today in this debate. Firstly, that we solve better, and secondly, the proposition brings more harms. Our counter plan in today's debate is to make a renewable energy and at the same time sustain development for developed nations. However, for developing nations, we would only sustain development because they have priorities to place on their people and the government's responsibility for these people. Now, before going on to my substantives, I would like to go into the rebuttals for the key points brought to us by the previous speaker. Firstly, they talked about the line where they prioritize in their first argument. We believe that we should prioritize both because of the fact that we want progress and development for a more efficient, solved environment. We believe that this would bring the betterment of both the environment and progress of the nation. They also said it was irreversible. Then how do you plan to solve this solution if this is irreversible? We present you actual practical key points to solving the solution. Now, Mr. Speaker, secondly, on their argument, they talked about the effectiveness for society. Doesn't the government also have a responsibility to help with the basic needs of the people from the economy? And that all comes out from the economy. And furthermore, is not mutually exclusive in their case, since we also provide those. Now, going on, under a principle of progress, we have three arguments today. Firstly, efficiency. Secondly, solvency. And our Deputy Speaker will present you the argument on cycle. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, on efficiency. Mr. Speaker, we believe that there is better efficiency for developed nations. In the status quo, we do not have the technology in order to reverse the environment. We are nearly at the peak of coming to this technology. If we don't, for developed nations, utilize both, growth in the development area will stagnate, preventing renewable energy from being utilized in the status quo, which we believe is fundamental in order to keep the environment and the progress of the nation to grow. Therefore, the only method that we can use in the status quo is to prioritize both for developed nations. For example, a Scandinavian country in the status quo is vowing to become coal-free by 2020 because of the development they utilize to create technology for renewable energy sources, and we believe that this will benefit both factors. However, for developing nations, we in our counter plan are saying that we want developing nations to prioritize the growth of their economy because the government has a fundamental duty to do this to their citizens, as we said in our rebuttals. For example, Mr. Speaker, we don't want to ignore the starving in India and make them change to renewable energy without actually helping the growth of the economy first before the environment, and we want to have priorities in today's debate. These developing countries have priorities, and they need to utilize it for the future and become more of a green nation later. We believe that fostering both will help efficiency for the development of the economy. And more technology, Mr. Speaker, from the development of the economy equals a greener environment, and in the status quo, technology is not working, as you can clearly see, since many countries have not changed to renewable energy sources, and proposition just wants to abandon that. Now, Mr. Speaker, secondly, on my argument on solvency, there's no solvency in the proposition's case. Even if, in their best case, if the environment is completely restored, even the current technology disallows that, and they will be practically impossible to solve. If this happens, there will be no economy anymore. The economy will essentially just stagnate and regress, and just like a roller coaster, it will drop completely. Since development stagnates, there will be a keep on changing of focus and resources, and they will never be able to develop properly on both at the same time, since the proposition wants to enact this policy. They don't even acknowledge the developing countries in the status quo and don't actually believe that they have priorities and the fundamental right to do something for their citizens. Their case is merely stopping one for the other and letting cut loose of progress in the status quo, and we believe that this is a fundamental harm, and based on their harm principle, we believe that we will ask one burden before going off the podium. Our Are you willing to give up progress?
May I start? So, Mr. Speaker, this is a debate about whether what is a more prioritized value between the environment and the economy, Mr. Speaker. In today's debate, and by the rebuttals and my last constructive argument, I'd like to prove you why environment is a better perceived value than the economy from the opponent team. So, directly moving on to rebuttals to their case. So, firstly, they talked about in the first argument, the efficiency is very important for especially the developing nations. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to point out this point that the developing nations are the vulnerables in the current status quo. And also, because in developed nations such as America, Korea, or Japan, we show a lot of failures in the current status quo. The environment is failing, and also in China, because they valued more in economy, the microdose is so high that even the citizens are having less quality of life, Mr. Speaker. We don't want this problem to happen in the developing nations in the first place. So because we want more kind of quality and better quality of technology for these developing nations, we're considering the fact that the environment is more crucial for this developing nations to progress in a longer term. And also in the start of the get-go of today's debate, because our Prime Minister have proved you to why this kind of we can guarantee a long-term benefit in the first place. Actually, by this, towards the developing nations, in our case, we can provide more mature benefits compared to their case. Secondly, they talk about, in our case, we will lose the economy. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that actually compared to environment, if we reverse the destruction of the environment, we can guarantee that the environment is completely going into, once the environment is like in the nature. However, Mr. Speaker, we cannot guarantee the economics, and also because the economy is due to a lot of international, and also there are a lot of other reasons why the economy has changed. Actually, we cannot guarantee the benefit of the economy. However, compared in this case, in our case, we can provide much more better environment, and also by this we can benefit the economy because we can develop these kind of two core benefits by going together. So I think that their two arguments doesn't stand anymore. Going on to our rebuttal of our honorable Prime Minister in today's debate. The only rebuttal coming out from their case was that actually they would prioritize both of the value. So, Mr. Speaker, in the first place, prioritization is valued because the environment or in economy, these two values are one more important. If they value all of this, we cannot guarantee the benefits because if the economy fails, then the environment fails, and also if the environment fails, then the economy fails. It's a trickle-down economy and trickle-down environment in their case. However, Mr. Speaker, because we provide you why we can guarantee benefits in the long-term benefits, actually we can provide more better society and more qualified life for these individuals in the first place. Secondly, they rebutted to our honorable argument, which was about the effectiveness, that the government's role and government's responsibility is to get these basic needs. However, firstly, Mr. Speaker, actually these basic needs, we're not completely making that environmental die, Mr. Speaker. In the current status quo, there are a lot of technological development in the status quo. For example, like fossil fuel energy or some energy that is consistent in our case. Actually, we don't see the reason why in our case the citizens are dying. Secondly, actually because in their case the technology is failing because of the failure of an environment, they cannot assume all the benefits that they get. Moving on to our team's last constructive argument, how it will benefit the citizens in our case. The reason why the scientific community is doing this is to provide more benefits and more social benefits towards the society, Mr. Speaker, to prevent and to protect these individuals from the incidents, from people dying from microdose and environmental issues is by just developing, we cannot properly solve this problem in the first place. So, Mr. Speaker, now then, in their case, their citizens' life is getting more worse, the citizens dying, but the government is not taking care of this, but then they're just developing for their own benefit, Mr. Speaker. However, compared in our case, because in the long term we provide more protection in the environment and more protection of the citizens, Mr. Speaker, the conveniency would increase. And also by this, Mr. Speaker, consequently, the quality of the citizens' life would increase. By this reason, actually, this kind of countries from Korea and also Japan, we can compete with the international level by the motion. So by this reason, I think that the priority should be on the environment rather than economy. So by this reason, I'm very proud to propose the motion.
Thank you for that speech. Next is from the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
May I start? So, Mr. Speaker, before we go on to our last argument on a negative cycle that our opponents would actually create in their world, I'd like to firstly go on to our rebuttals. But before that, Mr. Speaker, let me justify to you what this debate means to the opposition bench today. We believe that the debate is not about whether the environment matters or not. We believe that the opposition bench had already made clear that the environment is also important for our world too. However, we believe that the debate here matters between whether we should prioritize something or whether we should first have growth in our technology so that we'll have more efficient help to the environment. So that, Mr. Speaker, we would like to clarify this debate as with this spirit. So now going on to our rebuttals. So firstly, Mr. Speaker, rebutting to their first argument. Their first argument was basically about effectiveness, and they talked about how actually how they have to identify the root cause in order to solve those problems. However, we have 3 points of response. Firstly, we believe that their sequence is actually reversed. We believe that the root cause, we believe that in order for the environment to be actually helped, we believe that the root cause should be identified first. And in order to identify the root cause, Mr. Speaker, we believe that for this identification, we need high-quality technology. And for high-quality technology, that's why we believe that development is important, especially in this case. Secondly, even if we actually lose effectiveness, still we believe that they are going to create a negative cycle in which they aren't going to solve anything because the same thing will happen over and over again, which we're going to explain in our third argument. Thirdly, and also even if we are not being effective, we still think that adaptation is mostly important in this case when as our opponents say, the environment is too severe. Now we're going to their second argument on citizens' life. We have 2 levels of response. Firstly, we believe that developing nations, the citizens, are also citizens, and we believe that we should actually care for these citizens too. And in order to care for them, we believe that the developed nations should prioritize development first so that they could develop the environment later. And that's why we believe that we are being more efficient. Secondly, for a better life, we believe that the environment should be helped, and we agree on this point. However, Mr. Speaker, as we already proved to you, and as we already told you, we believe that the way is where the debate is beginning, and we believe, and as we are telling you again and again, that first we need to prioritize development so that we will have high-quality technology to actually help the environment. To our first arguments on developed nations, they were being repetitive about the quality of life. However, as we're clarifying, as a side note here, we want to tell you, Judge, Mr. Speaker, that we are giving up on the environment. However, we're just basically trying to get a more effective solution where we could have technology to solve the root cause of the problem, as they call it. Secondly, even if we are achieving less quality of life, still we believe that developed nations have something to prioritize over other, and we believe that that's why development should be prioritized. To our second argument on solvency, they basically give us the same thing about effectiveness. However, we believe that it is basically like a roller coaster right now, where we could actually achieve development, but our opponents are just trying to get the roller coaster back down at the tip, so that we are going to that our efforts are going to be a waste. Now, going on to our argument about the negative cycle, we believe that problems are still going to exist in their world, our opponent's world, even if they claim that they have all these benefits, even in their best case. So firstly, what is the cycle we are talking about? Let's assume that even in their logic, actually, where they're talking about how they could reverse destruction, that we could assume that this actually works. This doesn't mean that people will completely change to sustainable energy because they aren't prioritizing development in their world, so thus they wouldn't have effective sustainable energy. And because people actually need energy to order to live, we believe that using a sustainable energy will be inevitable, and even in their best case, this creates a continuous cycle where people restore the nature, nature becomes once worse because of unsustainable energy, and people restore nature again. And we believe that this cycle continues. So what is the harm of the cycle that this creates? Firstly, we believe that there will be a lack of resources that slowly hinders the spread of the speed of the cycle, because when we use resources on nature, it means that there will be less resources to use on development later. Secondly, we believe that it will be waste of time and energy and effort when this cycle always continues in their world. So we will have to use the same effort and same resources over and over again. And for these reasons, for a better society, we are proud to oppose. Thank you.
May I start? Mr. Speaker, our team believes in today's debate that both teams' goal is to provide long-term effect to the citizens, and now we have to compare about which prioritization is going to be effective in time and money. Moving directly on to my two questions that I found throughout the debate. So the first question is about the effectiveness, about the motion, and I have two values. Firstly, selectively about the developing nation, and secondly, as a whole, as a society or the world. Moving on to the developing nation. Mr. Speaker, the opposition team stated that actually these developing nation is urgent on more technological development. However, Mr. Speaker, our team wants to emphasize that actually these developing nations use their action and use their productivity by the environment. They don't use AI for the technology. They use fishing, and they eat a lot of vegetables or things that are used by the environment, not by the technology. Mr. Speaker, in this case, our team believes that their life is dependent on the environment more than the technology that the opposition team is trying to get. Which means that actually, if we want a higher benefit for the developing nation, then we have to concentrate more and we have to prioritize more on these environment because the lives of these developing nation citizens is benching on these environmental issues. Also, secondly, our team believes that actually these environment harm that these developing nations know are getting are not justified. Our team believes that actually the root cause and the root harm of these environmental harm is actually developed nation who provided this. Our team believes that the developed nation, as an example, America or China, provide a lot of fossil fuel and provide a lot of CO2, which made environmental harm. Mr. Speaker, these developing nation has no fault and it has no effect toward the fact that they are getting environmental harm. However, why do they have to get environmental harm if the root cause was not them and it was actually the developed nation? No, our team believes that our team believes that the prioritization of prioritization of reversing the destruction of the nature and the environment of this developing nation is much more important than just concentrating and investing the money on the sustainable development of these energy. And secondly, our team believes that when we compare the money, and the investments that can be, our team in the both worst case scenario, in the government case, our team believes that because we have to reverse the environment destruction as a whole, it is going to need a lot of money. Secondly, also in the opposition team case, no, our team believes that because if we need a sustainable energy to develop, and also we have to maintain it in a long-term extent, Mr. Speaker, and the both team has a lot of money. Then we have to compare even if we pay more money, and we have to compare that the results will be guaranteed or not. Our team believes that actually our team's result will be guaranteed better because our team believes sustainable development. We don't know if this development is actually going to work and it's actually going to be implemented positively on the developed nation and the developing nation. And our team believes that then, and also because maintaining the cycle of these Maintaining the cycle of the sustainable form of development is very hard for both developing nation and the developed nation, which costs a lot of time and a lot of money for the countries to actually maintain the benefits of these sustainable form of development. So our team believes that actually, then rather just investing on the sustainable form of development, providing more investments on reversing the destruction of the environment is much more effective. Moving on to my second value about the society. Mr. Speaker, the opposition team stated that actually, when we compare the prioritization, when we compare the benefits, their side benefit is much more increased. However, our team believes it is actually slippery slope because if there's harsh environment and if there's no clean environment, actually sustainable energy won't be working well too. As an example, as our Deputy Prime Minister also explained, if there's a fine dust, then we can't use the wind energy power sources, which means that actually it's a slippery slope when the opposition team case is wanting a more sustainable energy and they are not providing prioritization on the environmental harms and the destruction that the environmental issues are taking, which means that actually there will be a vicious cycle happening also in a society case too. Moving on to my second question about the comparison about the prioritization and the effects that can happen by each prioritization. And our team believes in the government side we are prioritizing the reverse of the destruction and investing more money about maintaining these clean environment, and the opposition side is maintaining a sustainable form of development. Mr. Speaker, our team believes when we compare the urgency, because these environmental issues are very irreversible and it is very urgent in the status quo in the 21st century, our team believes that providing more money in these environmental issues are much more urgent. And also our team believes because sustainable energy is not effective toward the developing nation, because these developing nation economic productivity is moved by the environment, and also in the developed nations too. Our team believes that then rather just spending monies on these sustainable form of development is worse. So our team believes that in the world where we are providing money to reverse the destruction of the nature is much more better. And our team believes because of our three arguments and our two clashes, our team strongly propose to the motion.
May I start? Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to support an impossible claim. Both development and environment are very important things that we need to solve. But I will say this. We believe that the economy and the development of the nation can be prioritized over environment. Why? Because it's the fact that development and the economy are the things that are at the first when we're going to talk about how we're going to actually kill on how we're going to actually stop how we're going to stop the life and the quality of life of these people. Now, Mr. Speaker, moving on to my first clash, which is on development and sustainability. Mr. Speaker, we have both. Mr. Speaker, on one hand, we on our policy, we say that we're going to prioritize, we're not going to prioritize, but we're going to have a balance between sustainability and also actually reversing the environment for developed nations. Why? Because we believe that these developed nations have enough resources and they have enough research to actually know and to actually understand that they can actually split and divide some of their resources to help the environment. But for developing nations, we believe that these developing nations should primarily focus only on should prioritize only on development, as this is the thing that is going to affect the citizens and affect society first, before the environment. Mr. Speaker, I ask you a question. What will make these societies' life worse? Either a financial crisis, which can happen in a matter of years, or climate change, which will not affect us until the next century. Now, moving on to my second clash, which is on stakeholder impacts. Mr. Speaker, there are three stakeholders in this debate. Number one, the developed countries. Number two, the developing nations. And number three, the individuals that are at stake. Mr. Speaker, on developed nations, these developed nations actually need a balance between sustainability and development, and we provide it. Why? Because of the fact that even though they are still developed, they still have a fundamental and government right to actually do what's best for the citizens at the moment. And we believe that the best thing for these citizens is development. Moving on to the second stakeholder, which is on the developing nations. Mr. Speaker, we believe that these developing nations have a fundamental right to actually make sure that their citizens aren't just going to die from hyperinflation or infrastructure being terrible. We want to make sure that these developing nations actually can develop their country first and develop the resources and the energy needed to actually fund such resource-intensive plans, such as reversing the environment. Now, moving on to my final clash, which is on society. Mr. Speaker, this world, Mr. Speaker, the government side thinks that their world will have no bad things because of the fact that climate change and the environment is actually the thing that's impacting the environment more, is the thing that's impacting the environment, I mean the lives and the society more than the actual development development and economy. However, Mr. Speaker, this is not true because, Mr. Speaker, while the environmental damage is not going to affect these countries in the very close future, we believe that the development and the economy of these countries are the things that are going to impact the country now. And this is what we need to think about now. We need to think about the present and how we can actually make sure that all of this can be, and make sure that the economy and the development of these developed nations and developing nations are prioritized before the environment. Because, Mr. Speaker, the environment can kill us in 100 years, but the economy can kill us in just 1 year. For all these reasons, I'm very proud to oppose.
May I begin? Mr. Speaker, we should prioritize engagement and debate. In this debate, we should prioritize engagement that the proposition is really failing to do. No POIs taken or given. That's their side, Mr. Speaker. We should prioritize engagement in today's debate. It just seems like they have nothing to engage and nothing to rebut to our side. No rebuttal to our third argument, no POIs, and we wait that this includes that this is also a reason why we take this debate home. Now, moving on to the first reason why we take this debate home, which is about criteria and the promises that we have made and kept. Now, our side as the opposition, we clearly proved that firstly, prop brings more harm to the whole society and to the stakeholders who are mainly affected by today's debate. Secondly, we clearly proved that op brings much more a better world, and we believe that opposition brings much more a better world of environment and also sustainable development. Now, looking at their side of the proposition's promises that they actually claim that they will prove but failed, it's actually firstly they will say that they will reversing the environment actually works, and secondly that fixing the environment gives a better society. Now, moving into the first criteria and telling why they've proved, because there is no practicality in their whole case. Mr. Speaker, there has to be some feasibility and practicality to explain why this actually works. How does reversing environment work, Mr. Speaker? It's not just like you clap one hand and suddenly the environment is all restored. It's not like that, Mr. Speaker. We believe that there's no feasibility and practicality to explain why this works and why reversing environment works. We believe that the only solution is in our side. Now, moving on to the second criteria that they have failed to prove is actually about the environment gives a better society. Now, Mr. Speaker, no, because it's a cycle, Mr. Speaker. If you fix the environment and once you step on the development again, it just reverses everything else, because it brings a cycle, because once again you step on the development, it's actually saying that you will have more factories and develop the society, and we believe that even if you actually restore the environment, we believe that is useless. Now, moving on to the second reason why we take this back home, which is about pyramids. Now, let's just look at the world saying of their best case that might happen. They can maybe fix the environment, but this doesn't work, firstly, thanks to their PM saying that environment is irreversible. So we believe that their best case doesn't stand, but their own prime minister contradicting their whole case. Now, secondly, it doesn't work because there's no practicality, it's no feasible based on the policy in their society that they're giving. We believe that the only solution to fix this is on our side. Now, we would judge, let's not follow their worst case of giving no progress, that we actually got so hard going up the hill and they're just going back, reversing the progress that we made. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's just look at our world, that we're so good for the whole society. They say environment is important. And yes, environment is important. We actually say environment is important. And we're actually giving benefits to environment and actually giving benefits for the development each together in our side. We're not prioritizing one. We're giving balanced good benefits of the environment, and we believe that we're giving benefits for the development. That's our side, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we believe that for the prior promises that we clearly made and kept in today's debate, and the pyramids, we believe that the prop loses in today's debate. Thank you.
No, we said prioritize development and development.
May I begin?
So, Mr. Speaker, we think that side opposition is framing us as like you cannot sustain without progress. We think that this is never the case in the first place, because it doesn't mean that if you do not develop right in the current status quo, you do not die. Like even if in the worst case in developing countries, you do not die because you do not develop in the first place. We think that there are like millions and millions of people which die because of natural disasters in the current status quo, which die because of the unstable environment in the first place. Therefore, we think that that is never the case in the first place. But moreover, we think that in a society where we have limited resources, we think that we cannot never balance one. We think that this is very confusing under side opposition, mainly because in one hand, they say that they're going to prioritize economy, and one hand they're saying like they're going to balance economy and environment in the previous speech. We think that that is never going to occur in the first place, and therefore when they even do that policy, we think that they're going to fail at the last. So moving on to the two main criteria that we want to focus. First of all, the likelihood of which circumstance is which has more possibility of successing. Second of all, how this can actually bring a long-term harm or benefits to like these developing countries or developed countries. So first of all, when we compare the likelihood, inside opposition, we think that their technology is never guaranteed. We think that since the motion says attempt, we think that even if you develop a technology, you do not know if that technology is sustainable. Moreover, they never prove to us how this can actually develop the technology or something in the long term and used efficiently. Moreover, they never prove to us how these technologies is never going to bring any side effects in the first place. We think that we have constantly rebutted and constantly told you these points. We think that there are never no engagement until the end of the debate. However, let's compare inside government. We think inside government, when you have sustainable technology to actually reverse this kind of environment, we think that that is the moment where we can actually guarantee our benefits in the first place. So let's go on to the second criteria of long-term harms. So first of all, the only thing that they wanted to consider most importantly was upon developing countries. So first of all, we have constantly told you how developing countries are reliable on environment. They developed on environment. But moreover, we think that these developing countries are absolutely different from developed countries, because in these cases of developed countries before, they did not recognize that certain problem, that urgent problem in the first place. However, in the current status quo, we are in the tipping point, Mr. Speaker. We think that if we do not take action right now, when this actually leads to a long-term harm, we cannot reverse this back. We think that when this is the case, when this is the best moment and the last chance of you changing your environment to give a long-term benefit, we think that that is a point where we can actually change our environment and give a platform of development when we know what we did wrong in the first place. But most importantly, we think that when we develop something, the most harms go to the vulnerable people. The vulnerable people in today's motion is these developing countries. Even if they do not develop anything, these developed countries actually have like waste or have like wind, which actually can harm these vulnerable victims, which did not actually develop with that certain technology in the first place. And therefore, if they want to actually prioritize developing countries rather than developed countries in the first place, we think that we can actually prioritize that value much more, and therefore we win this debate.